Welcome to Writing Objectives and Assessing Student Progress. Our objectives for this session include: participants will examine an English Language Arts domain and complete a portion of the curriculum guide with template. Participants will implement strategies for writing clear objectives. And finally, participants will identify assessments based on student performance tasks. The domain in which we will be working today is 2.r.cl.1-9. That means we are in NRS Level 2. We are in the reading portion of the English Language Arts Standards. We're talking about comprehension in literature, and there are 9 standards within this domain. So let's take a look very quickly. This is the curriculum guide with template, and this is the section that deals with the domain that we are covering today. And the sections that are highlighted in the orange box are the ones that we'll be focusing on in this session. Some things to keep in mind when we're writing objectives. What concepts should students be using? In other words, what do they already know that we can leverage and build on? This is information, knowledge, and skills that they have coming into this instructional unit. What kinds of analysis should students be able to perform? In other words, what habits of the mind have they already developed? What types of critical thinking skills do they have already? And what are our expectations of the skills that they will build? What reading, writing, or speaking and listening skills should students develop at each NRS level? We often talk about how each NRS level builds on the one previous to it, but we also need to keep in mind that there are specific skills in each NRS level that need to be achieved before we can successfully transition our students to the next NRS level. And finally, what problem-solving skills should students be developing? And these are skills not just related to solving math problems, but what kind of thinkers, what kinds of approaches do our students take to being exposed to new information or a new way of doing things? Are they able to integrate new information easily? Those are the kinds of things that we need to keep in mind as we are writing our objectives. Strong objectives and clear performance indicators can make guiding and assessing student progress seamless. We know the what from what we will be assessing. We get that from our objectives, and we build the how in performance tasks. So how do I write a strong objective? I need to examine the standards for content. I need to select key words and phrases that describe specific skills or behaviors. I need to pay close attention to the verbs in the standards. They are clues to the behavior we want to see in our students. But analyze them to be sure they relate well to the objectives you're going to write. Read the standards to make sure you know what they are about. And there does not have to be a one-to-one correspondence between the number of standards and the number of objectives, and we'll talk about that a little more in detail in a moment. And finally, when writing strong objectives, we need to make sure that any objective meets the following 4 criteria. Objectives should always be specific, they should always be descriptive, they should always be reasonable, and they should always be measurable. Why do they need to be specific? Because we need to know exactly what skill or behavior we as instructors want to see our students develop. They need to be descriptive because we as teachers need to be able to describe to the students what we want them to do. Objectives need to be reasonable because we do not want to hold students to a standard that has nothing to do with the instruction that is being delivered. And finally, they need to be measurable because we need to know where our students started and where they got to and what happens in terms of skill development. And we're going to be coming back to and revisiting these criteria multiple times. And when we look at the standards, and this is a screenshot of the comprehension and literature standards for this domain. These are the actual ABE, ASE content standards. And when we look at these, we need to make sure that whatever is addressed in the ABE, ASE content standards is also reflected in any objectives that you write. Let's go back to the domain that we started with. The first standard is very, very dense, so let's take it apart and examine it for keywords and phrases. This is zooming in on the actual first standard in this domain from the ABE, ASE content standards. And as I said, this standard is very dense and has a great deal of content in it. Let's examine it a little more closely and use our criteria to write some robust objectives. And remember, we're only talking about the first standard right now. And when we look at that, we notice that it has one umbrella statement, and you're going to hear me refer to that quite often. And then there are 5 other statements that follow. The first few words of this umbrella standard make clear for us what we're talking about. Demonstrate comprehension strategies, and then it lists several ways we can do that through questioning, predicting, clarifying, and summarizing. And we'll hit all of those in the objectives that we write. Okay, so our umbrella statement is typed here, and let's look at that first statement that follows our umbrella statement. And it says, ask and answer such questions as who, what, when, where, why, and how to demonstrate understanding of key details in a text. So let's start to identify the key words and phrases and see if we can write a robust objective. We've already agreed that demonstrate comprehension strategies is a key phrase, so let's look for some more. Right away, we see that the behavior that our students are going to be asked to exhibit is asking and answering questions. And I wonder if you can look at the rest of this statement and find the other key details in it. I think the key details are key details. Okay? And is there anything else in this standard that we need to pay attention to? Yes, there is. The word understanding. I beg you to not use the word understanding when you are writing objectives, primarily because it is so difficult to measure understanding. We measure outcomes, but it's difficult to measure understanding. We can be very descriptive about what, or specific about what we want our students to understand. We can describe that completely. It may even be reasonable, but the word understanding in an objective makes it extremely difficult to measure. So let's try putting all of our key phrases together. And I like to think of this as either putting together a puzzle, or if you've ever seen or used that thing called magnetic poetry, which has lots of different words and endings and prefixes and suffixes of words, and you use them on the side of a file cabinet or a refrigerator to create sentences, and sometimes they're silly and sometimes they're poignant. So I like to think of that when I am putting together all of my key phrases and words to make an objective. So what we have, if we go back to what we picked out here, and we look at the key phrases, now all we're going to do is to try to make these key phrases and details come together in a robust statement. So when we put it together, and remember that we are talking about that first sub-statement, but we also have to include our umbrella statement, and that's the green portion of our new objective. So we have demonstrate the comprehension of text by asking who, what, when, where, why, and how to find key details in a text. Well, that was pretty easy, wasn't it? That didn't cause a lot of angst or anxiety. And one other thing I would like to point out is at the end of this objective, I have written the standard to which the objective applies. This is only a tool for me to use when I am writing objectives. It is not meant to imply that you have to do this when you are writing your own objectives. For me, as a strongly visual learner, it helps me keep track of the standards that I have covered, so I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that all of the content within the ABE-ASE content standards in my particular domain, in this case it's 2.R.CL.1-9. So this is a way that I can keep track and make sure that I have addressed all of the content in each standard in my objectives. Okay? Not a requirement, just a tool. Now, before we move any further forward, let's look at this and recognize a few things. The first one is we have not included any of the other strategies of predicting, clarifying, or summarizing in this objective. We have only concentrated on questioning, and that is purposeful. I did that on purpose because this first statement, the A statement underneath our umbrella statement, only deals with asking questions. Okay, and finally, again, before we move forward, we need to look at each of our 4 criteria to make sure that this objective clicks all of those buttons. Okay, so is it specific? Absolutely. We are very specific about, first of all, the behavior of asking questions, and then secondly, the types of questions that we're going to ask. Is it descriptive? Again, yes, very, very descriptive. We know exactly the directions, the instructions that we will give our students. And is it reasonable? Is it reasonable to expect that at the end of the instruction for this particular unit or domain, however you're going to structure your instruction, is it reasonable to expect that our students would be able to develop this skill? And the answer to that also is yes. We are not holding them to an impossibly high benchmark that they need to reach? And is it measurable? Would we be able to measure? Would we be able to score or give some type of standard to, well, standard is a bad word, but would we be able to say our students started here and then they got to this point? Would we be able to structure or craft some type of measurement tool or assessment that would show our students had made progress? And the answer to that again is yes. Okay, so moving forward, let's look at the next example. And remember, we're still talking about our umbrella statement of demonstrate comprehension strategies of questioning, predicting, clarifying, and summarizing, but this time we are looking at the second sub-statement that follows. And I've recreated them here. And I'm not going to read to you, but I just want to divide this second sub-statement into more specific sections so that I can highlight what I want. Okay, now again, remember, we're talking still about our umbrella statement, but now let's look for the key words and phrases within our sub-statement to see where that takes us. Okay, so we're going to be still asking and answering questions, and so that seems very similar to our first statement, our first objective that we wrote, but you will notice very quickly that that is where the similarity ends. The next key word and phrase is that we're going to be referring explicitly to the text. And then finally, we're going to be this time not just answering questions, but we're going to use the answers to those questions to make inferences and draw conclusions from what we've read. And these last two keywords and phrases, the one in the orange box and the one in the blue box, very important skills for our students to develop, whether they are planning to go on to post-secondary education or the workplace. They will need to be able to have these skills in their toolbox. Whether they are taking an entrance exam for college or the high school equivalency exam, or they're reading they're going through some type of orientation process and have to do reading in order to be able to pass a skills test. These things are going to be extremely important for our students to develop. All right. And then lastly, before we move forward, I want to see if you can identify, before I show them, what keywords and phrases in the umbrella statement you think that these skills that we've already highlighted get at. I'll give you a moment to think about that. And then I will show you that I think we're talking about predicting and clarifying. And we'll get to that next. So we're going to put our objective all together using our magnetic poetry analogy. And we're talking about this. Demonstrate the comprehension of text by predicting and clarifying through asking and answering questions, citing explicit references to the text to support answers, draw conclusions, or make inferences. Now you can see that compared to how our standard was written, like this, that we have changed it significantly into a statement that makes sense grammatically, and it also will hit all four of our criteria. Okay, so let's go through that. Is this objective specific? We're going to be asking and answering questions using explicit references from the text to support our answers, draw conclusions, and make inferences. Absolutely. Is it descriptive? Yes. We could tell our students, we could give instructions to them very clearly based on this objective, and our students would know what we're getting at. Is it reasonable? Is it reasonable that after your instruction, your students would know what they're being asked to do? And is it reasonable to expect as an instructor that my students would be able to do this at the end of instruction? And if the answer to that is yes, then it is a reasonable objective. And finally, is it measurable? Again, think about how you would assess student progress for this objective. What kinds of tools would you use or develop that would allow you to measure whether or not your students have mastered this skill? Okay, and it's also important to think when you're writing the objectives, you've got to think about how you would be measuring that so that all flows very smoothly into the assessment piece. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Okay, so I want to go back again. Remember, I said that we're going to be hitting these comprehension strategies of predicting and clarifying. So obviously, drawing conclusions and making inferences, well, making inferences is more about predicting than drawing conclusions is. But I think that hits on that. And then also our example, and I've color-coded these specifically so you know what part of the sub-statement gets at the umbrella statement. When we're referring explicitly to the text, we are clarifying our responses, we are clarifying our answers, we are making clear connections between our inferences and where we came up with that evidence in the text. Okay? All right, so let's move on again. You're doing so well. Let's look again at our next example, and this time we're going to be talking about the third statement, and we've got it here. So our umbrella statement stays the same, obviously, and this time we're going to recount stories, including fables, folk tales, and myths from diverse cultures, and determine their central message, lesson, or moral, and how it is conveyed through key details in the text. And we thought the last one had a lot going on. Okay? So, apologize. Let's move forward and think about the how we're going to start attacking this particular sub-statement, and remembering that we're looking always for those key details within the text, okay? Just like our students need to do. So in this one, I'm going to go at it maybe a little differently than I have in the past because there's so much information here. So I want to really drill down, and I'm looking at specifically right now the two verbs I have within this standard, okay? And they are recount and determine. So my students are going to be needing to do two different things, okay? And we'll break it down a little further in a moment, all right? So I highlighted my two verbs, and I think that they are important. So we're going to come back to those in a moment. And then next, I highlighted two different pieces that I want us to take a closer look at, okay? And the orange boxes, the orange portion, cites the types of works that are to be read, along with the specification that they come from different cultures. And then the blue box cites what within those selections or within those types of readings are going, that I'm going to have to determine and then recount. So two different skills going on here. Number one, I have to find from my readings what the central messages, lessons, or morals are, and how they are conveyed through the information in the text. So is it a fable that is retold orally from generation to generation? Are these lessons, are they cave drawings that are also interpreted and passed down through stories and through music or poetry? So there's a lot of different ways, given a lot of different methods through the fables and folk tales and myths, how all of this information can be conveyed. And so our students are going to have to identify the method as well as the message. So yeah, a lot going on in this one. And pardon me, I want to also point out to you that this, you may be able, I should have pointed it out previously, but if you look at the first two standards we did, that we looked at, both of the sub-statements began by asking and answering questions. And I want you to know that it is absolutely fine if you see common words or phrases within standards. It is absolutely okay if you decide you want to try and combine two or more standards into one objective. You don't have to have one objective for every standard, but what you have to be very careful and very diligent about checking is that the content from each of the standards that you're using or going to combine, the content, the skills covered or the skills addressed have to be present in that objective, okay? You can't leave anything out, all right? So be very, very careful if you do try and combine more than one standard into one objective, okay? All right, so we have identified our key words and phrases within the sub-statement, and I bet you can probably guess which one of the comprehension strategies we're talking about, right? I don't even have to circle it for you or put a box around it. We're talking about summarizing, okay? So now we're going to reword everything and make sure grammatically we have a correct statement, and that the rest of our 4 criteria are met by this or through this objective. So what we have is that we're going to demonstrate the comprehension of text by summarizing or recounting stories, including fables, folk tales, and myths from diverse cultures, and determining their central message, lesson, or moral, and how it is conveyed through key details in the text. Now, I think we can all agree that this is very, very specific. And I think it's important to recognize now when we are describing this to our students that we talk about multiple ways of recounting. Okay, this is a reading standard, but you are not limited to written text now when you have your students recount these things. So as you start to look at the rest of your curriculum, especially the curriculum guide and template, you know that directly below the section for the objectives come the performance tasks, and right below that we start building the learning plan, and that involves all of the instructional activities. And so as your students are engaged in this unit of instruction, one of the things you might be able to do is to really diversify how this information gets presented to you or presented to the rest of the class. There can be, you can do debates, you can have your students write plays, you can have your students write a song for those students who are very musically inclined, or a rap, or or visually it can be represented through art. You can do some graphic organizers for your students to, make the key message or lesson or moral be the center of a graphic organizer, and then the methods that it gets conveyed to you or to the culture are all the spokes of a wheel. So you can do lots and lots of different things to recount these stories. And I think that this one in particular lends itself very nicely to differentiated instruction and having your students come up with multiple ways of recounting the stories, which then again lead themselves to lots of different ways to assess whether or not your students have mastered this skill. Okay, let's go on to the fourth one. And because of time, we're only going to be able to look at this last one. We're not going to be able to look at the last one. We're going to end up doing the D portion, and that's it. And then we'll talk a little bit about performance tasks before we wrap up. Okay? So our fourth statement, our fourth standard says that we will describe how characters in a story respond to major events and challenges. And initially, it might seem like this is a very straightforward, very simple standard to convert to an objective. And initially I would say, yes, you're right, I would agree with you. But as we look at this very closely and critically, we have to make sure that nothing is missing from this standard in the way it's worded that could help us narrow down the skill and make this more specific, more descriptive. Okay? So I think personally that there are some things missing from this standard, and so in order to turn it into a reasonable, measurable objective, we need to add to it a little bit. So before I can really describe how characters in a story are responding to something, I have to first be able to identify what those responses or reactions are. So the first change I'm going to make to this standard when turning it into an objective is to change that. I'm going to identify and describe. So I've added the verb identify. And describe how characters in a story respond to major events and challenges. Okay? And then I really want to describe, or I really want to identify what are we describing exactly. And we're describing how characters in a story respond, but to really, again, be able to be specific and descriptive and measurable, I need to really drill down on this and say I'm actually describing the reactions characters have. And you could put the word response here for reactions. You could say identify and describe the responses of characters, but I don't like to have the same word. Granted, they're two different tenses, but I don't like to have the same word appear more than once in a sentence. So that's why I changed it to reactions. So I'm identifying and describing the reactions of characters in a story as they respond to major events and challenges. Okay? So, and then next, we're talking about the characters. So we've got to identify reactions of the characters as they are responding to major events and challenges. And we're almost there. I promise you, we're almost there. And I'm not really adding anything else to this standard. So it's time to play magnetic poetry. And this is what we end up with. Our whole objective becomes demonstrate the comprehension of text by questioning, clarifying, and summarizing through identifying and describing the reactions of characters as they respond to major events and challenges. Okay, not too terribly bad, but I think it makes our objective more specific definitely. More descriptive so that we can give clear instructions to our students and they will know what it is we want them to do. Very reasonable and also very measurable. Okay? All right. So we've written now 4 objectives, and it didn't really hurt that much, did it? We got through it. Okay? Most of you, or many of you, know that when I left teaching for a while, I worked in the social service field, and I was I spent a great deal of my time working in mental health and the addiction recovery field. And those fields have their own way of talking, and they have some of their own lingo, and some of you may be familiar with some of it and others not so much. But one of the things we often refer to when a group or an organization or a family are aware that something is going on, but they're not willing to talk about it or confront it, we describe that situation as the elephant in the room. And I think there was even a book written about the elephant in the living room. So that title, that title refers to this situation. And we, you and I, we have an elephant in the room, and I'm going to confront it right now. And I'm going to say that there are probably more than a few of you out there who are thinking, Libby, instead of going through all of this, can we just copy and paste the standards as our objectives? And the answer to that is no, we can't. Okay, we can't just copy and paste, because if we did, you could miss out on the following opportunities. Okay, you could miss out on the opportunity to really examine the standards and find out for yourself what these skills and knowledge, what each standard addresses in terms of the skills and knowledge, all right, that we expect our students to get to or to master. And you can miss out on the opportunity to use language that better reflects the intent of strong objectives. So going back to that 4th objective that we wrote, where we added and clarified the meanings of the standards, you may have thought, well, I remember hearing somewhere that we can't add to or change the way the standards are written. And that's absolutely true. I did not change the standard. The standard of 2.r.cl.1-D or 1D is the standard stayed the same. I did not change the standard. I used the wording from the standard and changed that to write my objective. So the standard remains as it was, but the objective is what is worded differently so that we could write an objective that is specific, descriptive, reasonable, and enforceable. And that is a great example of this very last statement here. If we just copy and paste the standards as objectives, we're using language that may not reflect the skill that we really want to get at. Okay, the standard uses the word understanding a lot, and we have already agreed. We didn't give away our firstborn child, but we have already agreed that we will not use the word understand when we're writing objectives, because it is not measurable. Okay, and further, although the standards are really well crafted, they're not meant to be objectives. Standards are benchmarks to reach, while objectives, as I said earlier, concentrate on the outcomes of instruction. Okay, so we've agreed on 2 things now. We won't ever use the word understand when we write objectives, and we won't just phone it in and copy and paste the standards as our objectives, okay? And when I say phone it in, I mean kind of take the easy way out, because, you know, we are being called on by the state, and we're being looked at by the nation, by the feds, if you will. They are aware that we are going through this process of aligning our instruction to college and career readiness standards and our Illinois ABE ASE content standards. They know that we're going through this process, and they are waiting to see what happens, what our outcome is. You know, we are on the forefront of aligning adult education instruction with standards, and there's only a couple of other states who are, you know, in the first cart of the roller coaster with us. And it is a roller coaster. There have been a lot of ups and downs, but what we're doing is a process that is going to inform best practices throughout the nation as we continue to write this curriculum, to implement this curriculum, to study whether or not our efforts are having an impact in student outcomes. We're going to be informing the rest of the field for years to come. And that's what I mean by we can't just phone this in. We have to really honor the responsibility that we have to write a very rigorous and robust curriculum. And that includes writing very strong and very clear objectives. Okay? All right. So, question number 2 is, do I have to reference each standard in the objective section? And remember how I put the standard number at the behind each objective that I wrote? You don't have to do that. As I mentioned, it's just a tool. It's not a requirement. Okay? Every standard, however, every standard in the domain must be represented in the objectives. That means that I have to address all the content of each standard in the objective section. Okay? And it may be that you take a standard like one of the ones we looked at that had a lot of information in it. You may even define that instead of combining 2 standards into an objective, you have to take a standard and break it into more than one objective. And that's okay to do as well. All right? So let's take a look again. This is a shot of the comprehension and literature domain in NRS Level 2. I want you to pay attention to, or we're going to talk for a second about the essential understandings and the essential questions, because these are preloaded, if you will, into the curriculum guide with template. And so you have these already in your curriculum guide. And I want to point out why they're important, okay? The 2 sections right above that we're talking about, the essential understandings and essential questions, we want to emphasize that really this curriculum guide with template is a great tool that can guide you throughout the process of writing your curriculum, the whole process. Our objectives that we just looked at, they should get us to the point where we can look at the essential understandings and say, yep, nailed it, we got it. Every one of those essential understandings are met in the objectives we wrote. Now, granted, we were only looking today at the first example, or the first standard, and we didn't even get all of that standard addressed in our objectives just because of time. But if you look at this very first essential understanding, it says application of specific reading strategies can be used to increase comprehension. So all of the 4 objectives that we wrote, if we remember all the way back to that very first umbrella statement, it said that we were going to demonstrate comprehension strategies of questioning, predicting, clarifying, and summarizing to increase comprehension of text. And the first two standards first two objectives we did involved asking and answering questions. The second one also further took the asking and answering questions to a higher level, because then we were also using the strategy of predicting and clarifying. And the fourth one that we did dealt with summarizing. Actually, maybe it was the third one. The third one did summarizing. But so in three objectives, we addressed all four of those comprehension strategies. Okay? Now that doesn't mean we're done and don't have to do that fifth substatement. It may be that as you look at it, as you read that fifth and final part of the standard, maybe we've already addressed that in the objectives we wrote, but maybe not. So we have to make sure that we have all of that content in there. So if you were to continue filling out this domain, you would hit on, hopefully, in your objectives, the other four essential understandings. And then the essential questions, if you look at those, they can lend themselves to inspiring an activity or an assessment that can be used in the performance task section. It's like we planned this or something, which we did. But anyway, let's talk again. Let's talk about assessing student performance, okay? So now that we have a really good grasp of what it takes to write strong objectives, let's take that further and tackle identifying the performance tasks, or how do I know my students are making the kind of progress I think they should be making. And here's a kind of a pulled back view of the curriculum guide with template for this entire domain. And we have already talked about the essential understandings, essential questions. Those are loaded into that before you begin. And then the students will be able to section is what we just completed. And those are the objectives. Now we're going to talk about evidence for assessing learning. Okay? So by and large, the majority of submissions that we have received so far, the examples of the curriculum that programs are writing, did an exceptional job of telling us what will be assessed. So in this evidence for assessing learning section, programs were telling us what they were going to assess. But what we really want to get at within that section is how you're going to be assessing things. Because if you think about it, the objectives already tell us what you're going to be assessing. So now we have to kind of change our way of thinking and focus on the how. How will I assess each of these objectives? Okay? So performance tasks are a required element of your curriculum. They follow up and support the implementation of any instruction, and they inform you of student progress or lack thereof. Okay? So looking at our objectives, I'm going to concentrate on the first one for just a moment, and I'm going to throw a bunch of examples of performance tasks up here and talk about a few of them, okay? And you'll notice that not each of them, but many of them, a few of them have with a rubric in parentheses behind them. And I think rubrics are a great opportunity for instructors to really inform themselves about whether or not students are making progress. And you can make a rubric for lots of different activities, and it can take lots of different shapes and forms, and you're only limited by your creativity. And so if you need information or would like some more information on writing rubrics, my email address will pop up here at the end of this session, and feel free to contact me about that. And there's lots of information for you on the internet too about writing rubrics. Okay, so a couple of these examples. Let's say that you've done a large group reading, or you've had students reading independently, and now you're going to do just an oral question and answer. You're going to have students, maybe you've got true false questions you want to ask, and so you're going to, your students may have red and green index cards that they hold up, green for true and a red for false. And you are observing who's getting the answers right, who's not getting the answers right, or who's not participating at all. Okay, so that in and of itself can become, just tally marks can give you an idea of who's on top of this particular skill that you are assessing and who's not. Who am I game? So one of the things that we talked about in our objectives was getting at questioning, and that's what this objective is focused on. And so maybe you have given your students certain characters from the story that you've been reading, and your students have to then you got, let's say we've got 5 characters in a story, so 5 students are each one of those characters, and the rest of your students are asking those who, what, when, where, why questions, or are asking other questions, to get at, are you so-and-so character? Are you Hester Prynne? So those are the kinds of activities that you can do. You can do matching worksheets. Worksheets are a great tool for assessment. I don't fully support the idea of just having students do worksheets all day, because that's not instruction. But you can use worksheets as a way to assess whether or not your students are developing this skill. Observing group work as you walk around, and are you assessing the amount of engagement? Is that an indicator to you whether or not students are getting it, or is the student who hangs back, are they just introverted when you're doing group work, and that produces anxiety for them? Are they lazy? Are they just doing it because the court told them they had to? So level of participation can inform you on whether or not students are developing this skill. The quality of their conversations, the quality of their work product, those kinds of things. Okay. So there are lots of ways that we can assess student performance. Let's look at the second objective that we wrote, and we'll find that most of the previous examples could be adapted to this objective as well, as long as we put the emphasis on citing explicit references to the text. Okay, and likewise, other types of activities could also be used. But we have to make sure that we encourage students maybe to draw different conclusions or to make inferences. If you attended our 2-day standards to strategies training in the past, you remember on day 1 that we were talking about English language arts. One of the tools that we used, one of the resources we used, was the King Midas story. And we talked about how in using that, some groups would use that as a tool to then write a different ending, or make predictions about possible outcomes from a different character's point of view. So as long as we are referencing the text and developing that skill, there are lots of different activities that you could do. Okay? And now let's talk for just a brief moment about the other category within this section of assessing learning, or evidence for assessing learning. The other category gets at those things that aren't, quote, graded. Okay, so interactive journals can be used, but if you're going to grade their journals, then that would be a performance task. It wouldn't be other. So if you're giving a score or a grade to something, that may help you decide whether it's going to be a performance task or one of those other tasks, okay? Exit tickets, where you as the instructor will give a prompt to your students and they write their response on a post-it note, and then they slap it on the door or some other place you have indicated on their way out of class. You could say, you can make a prompt be something like, one thing I was really surprised about today, or one thing I learned today, something I'm still a little bit fuzzy on, ... So those kinds of things can give you an idea of who's getting it and who's not, okay? Your own just strolling around the classroom while your students are doing independent or group work can give you an idea of what's going on and how students are getting things, okay? And then just having conversations with your students in groups or as individuals, like maybe as they're arriving for class, you can have some of those conversations. That can also give you a little bit of information to keep track of in the back of your mind, okay? All right, so we have reached the end of this session. I hope that you have been given some useful information. I hope it is something that will then inform you as you start or continue writing objectives. And if you have any questions at all, or you would like more information on anything we talked about within this video, then please, by all means, get in touch with either Danny Francis, Dawn Hughes, or myself. I appreciate the time that you took to watch this video. And again, any questions at all, don't hesitate to reach out to one of us.